Howdy folks, going to do a quick video here to share some resources and links that I've been collecting over the last few months. Lots of really great stuff here, definitely worth paying attention to as this is a rapidly emerging space, this being large language models and AI and machine learning generally. Pretty much this presentation has one or two slides. A few things that I'll highlight here, and I encourage you to go look at all these. There's a really fantastic talk that's right here, Emergence and Reasoning in Large Language Models. The concept that large language models, as they grow larger, essentially capabilities emerge based upon how large the models are, which I think is a really fascinating idea and is root to some of the things I think a lot about when I try and do research, which is, quite frankly, people don't know what all of these models, like what they can do. And so there's huge room in the space, in the technology space, in the academic space, in the research space right now, for people to do research and to play around and figure out what these things can do. And you, yes, you could discover things that these large language models could do that are novel and new and that nobody else knows about. This great talk here by Jason Wei, a researcher, I believe, at Google. He talks about emergent abilities, chain of thought prompting, and then a few other kind of great topics. He also dug up a deck that he produced that is this talk. And as you can see here, this is a fantastic little animation that just shows the size of the models, and then all of a sudden, huge capabilities across many different kinds of measurements just emerge. As the models grow, they just, all of a sudden, they can do these things. So really fascinating talk there by Jason Wei. Sam Altman did a recent interview at Strictly VC. This interview really flew under the radar. Didn't get all that many views, but it is an absolute banger of an interview. Definitely go check that one out. Sam walks through what he expects to happen with regard to AI and AGI, and his opinion is AGI is going to be here soon. Not next year, not next week, but soon. Another great webinar from Stanford, GPT-3 and beyond. Another great talk there from a professor. A little lesser known account, David Shapiro did a great talk on Raven, his take on artificial cognitive entities. We're totally living in the future, then I can say that out loud. It's now an open source project, and this is the intro to it. Great video by Imad at Moonshots and Mindsets, Peter Diamandis' podcast, really talking about Stability.ai and where Imad's startup is going. You would know Stability.ai as the folks who released Stable Diffusion and continue to build amazing open source machine learning models. Alan Thompson is also a fantastic YouTuber, and he is on top of this space like no other. Really, I find a lot of great information coming from his videos about where we're headed with large language models, machine learning, and AI in general. So check out Alan. A bunch of different projects or papers that I found. Democratizing Artificial Intelligence Research. This is DARE. Really great GitHub repo with just fantastic resources for everybody to check out. One question I've been consistently having is how am I going to know how much money I'm spending with these calls to OpenAI? So there's a recent project Helicone, I think I'm saying that, which helps figure out the observability for these projects so you can have a sense of how much money you're spending. Promptify, another great open source repo with a bunch of great prompting resources. A really fantastic paper on moral chain of thought. Can you have large language models actually reason about moral concepts? Turns out, seems like maybe you can. And then rounding up the list of papers, can language models learn from explanations and context? So this is some real deep prompt engineering thinking that's worth knowing if you want to get deep into the prompt engineering world. Moving on to some other great links here. A bunch of folks that I've been following on Twitter. Ethan Mollick's Substack, he's also on Twitter. He writes about using machine learning for education. He's gone really deep on this. Look at some of his writing. It's just really fantastic, especially when we think about pedagogy and education and how to actually not be afraid of this technology, but how to actually leverage and use it. Harrison Chase is just great. He's one of the folks who's building LangChain, actually. He founded LangChain. Kevin Fisher, a really interesting build out with Digital Souls, so creating virtual people using these large language models. On and on and on. So some really great folks to check out there. And then some stuff that I put in the category of things that have made me go, whoa, this year so far. GPT-3.5 exhibits theory of mind. This is the kind of thing that really only shows up in humans when they get a little older. Pretty wild stuff there. Toolformer. Can you teach large language models to use external tools from within the model? Can they reason about the fact that they have access to tools? That's what this paper's about. A fun little one here, ChatGPT improvements emitted as a Git diff. So one of the favorite uses I have for ChatGPT is helping me improve text. I have a whole macro on that you can find out on LinkedIn. But turns out you can also have it write Git diffs. And so if you wanted to read what it's going to do to change your text in Git diff format, you can ask it to do that. There's some examples there. There was a hackathon recently where a team won by creating essentially imaginary backends using large language models. So they created a context or Python setup where you could call basically a virtual API that was actually just backended by a large language model and a couple of prompts. Worked surprisingly well. Other fun stuff, John Carmack is getting into AGI. I think that's just absolutely fantastic. If you all know who John Carmack is, that's great news. An experiment I did, which I'm going to go into detail about here in just a moment, is using GPT-3.5 or other OpenAI API calls and Google Sheets. And then I'll leave you with a link to the LangChain Google Colab notebooks that I've been collecting out of my GitHub repo. So we're going to talk about this spreadsheet experiment for a minute. So in brief, what we've got here is an app script, pretty short, again, out on my repo. You can install it into the tool chain here in Google Sheets, and now you can call, as you can see here, a function that allows you to call the API out to OpenAI. And you can call it with different models. In this instance, I wanted to see what do the different models do in response to the prompt, write a story that begins with, it was a dark and stormy night. And so we have different results here between Text DaVinci 03, Text DaVinci 02, an older model, and Text Curie 01, an even older model. And they have different results, which I think is just really interesting. This is another example of how you could run experiments yourself, is spin up some spreadsheets, run some experiments, chain some prompts together, figure some stuff out. Another great example of running prompts in chains. So this one is pretty straightforward. Tell me what you know about, and then we're looking up this character Sherlock Holmes. And then we're saying, hey, what should we ask this person for help with? We get an answer for that. Write them a letter asking for that help. We get an answer for that. And you can just imagine what you could do with this in a variety of different contexts and settings. If that's business, if that's running experiments, if that's, who knows, right? This is just really going to be powerful. Again, here's the code. Check it out for yourself. There's a LinkedIn post on this as well. I encourage you to go read. Yeah, so those are a bunch of different links I encourage you to check out. Last thing, some news, totally, I think, under the radar here, and this is part of where I found Kevin Fisher, who I mentioned this earlier, this Solstice Studios, where they're building digital souls. What a crazy concept. We're truly living in the future. He has this hot take here. OpenAI will not be the language model provider at the infrastructure layer anymore. I don't know that I agree 100% with Kevin, but I do think there was going to be a lot of movement in the large language model space this year, especially from Imad and the team at Stability.ai. Imad is saying, just give us a couple of months and we'll have some open source large language models that folks will be able to pull down and run on their own computers, which I think is some pretty interesting under the radar news.